everyone. Great to be here today to talk about the 10 things that change when you stop bootstrapping your company. My name is Kristen Goldstein, and I was trained on Wall Street, where I managed the software investments for a hedge fund at Goldman Sachs. I spent the greater part of the past 20 years as an operator, founder, and investor in tech startups through 3 economic cycles. I'm pretty sure we're in the middle of the 3rd cycle, entering the back half. In 1999, during Cycle 1, I was the Director of Finance and Business Development at Opinions, which is now part of eBay. The founders of Opinions went on to start companies like AngelList and Nextdoor, which you may have heard of. At the beginning of Cycle 2 in 2003, I co-founded Loyalty Lab, a software company that is the loyalty marketing engine for some of the largest global brands. It was sold to TIPCO in 2010. And in 2010, at the beginning of Cycle 3, I co-founded BackOps, which we bootstrapped to $3 million in revenue within 2 years and raised $10 million from Tier 1 investors. And in 2014, I ended up founding Scalus, a software spin-out from BackOps. I think I have a pretty unique perspective, having spent a number of years as the fastest growing startups such as AngelList and Anaplan, connecting the dots through hundreds of board meetings, specifically what did and did not work to scale the great companies. Slide 1, the 3 Ps, product, people, and process. So the biggest overarching thing that changes when you stop bootstrapping is that complexity explodes exponentially when your focus expands from building a product to building a company. Because this requires actually all 3 Ps, people, product, and process, to be in sync, whereas before you were just worried about the first, the product. Adding the people part of the equation has become relatively harder than previous cycles when the cost of building the product was higher. And as some of you may remember, during the internet bubble, the founders were generally people who got together, raised money, then hired the technical people. Building the product was the hard part, and Silicon Valley in the late 90s was filled with Harvard MBAs like myself with boil-the-ocean ideas, recruiting engineers to build. And not surprisingly, most of these startups failed to reach product market fit despite having burned piles of cash. And from these ashes emerged the lean startup methodology. Now, today's founders are product people. They're laser focused on product MVP, or minimal viable product. And Silicon Valley is now filled with product geniuses who quickly and inexpensively build MVP, but struggle to build world-class teams to quickly scale the company beyond the one-trick pony stage. Moreover, many of today's product-centric founders who strive to preserve the startup culture and hire within their circle have not yet had a chance to cultivate a vast professional network of people who know how to scale a company. So when their VCs bring in these hired hands, chaos usually follows, often leading to destabilization of the company, and it falls apart. Lastly, until the product and people parts are there, the need to build process, actually making success repeatable and repeating, is a high quality problem. Most startups actually don't even get to this point. We'll spend most of our time today discussing the people part of the 3 Ps. Not getting this part right prevents companies from scaling beyond Series A, which is usually the first round of institutional funding. Slide 2, people, hiring slow, and mythical man month. One of the most painful lessons I learned after raising the big round is that mythical man month is real. Things just take longer as you add people, the 2nd P. While we all know better than to hire in haste, it's almost impossible to resist the extreme pressure to recruit quickly. Here's why. Your VCs will demand your first priority is to build the team. 80% of your time should be spent on recruiting. And now your natural interpretation as an entrepreneur is that, wow, 80% is a lot. The sooner I get this done, the sooner I can go back to building the product and the business, right? Well, it turns out trusted human relationships can't be manufactured that quickly on the fly. It builds over time. Which takes us to the next thing that changes when you stop bootstrapping. Slide 3, people, firing fast and continual recruiting. As CEO, your 2nd or even 3rd full-time job as recruiter starts immediately and lasts forever. Rather than hire slow and fire fast, most founders actually do exactly the opposite. The last point was about why it's hard to hire slowly. This one is about why it's so hard to fire quickly. At about 20 employees, you have to start hiring outside of your inner circle, which increases the risk of mishires dramatically. At one of the startups I co-founded, we ran a victory lap around the building when a critical hire accepted right before we closed our Series A round. He was a pretty well-known, press release-worthy executive coming out of a big-scaled startup, founded and backed by the best, of course. We didn't realize until much later that the previous startup was already scaled before he ever got there, so we ended up with a rock star bus driver who didn't know how to build or drive the bus. So we ended up with a rock star bus driver who didn't know how to design or build the bus for him to drive, which is what we really, really needed. As expected, the first 90 days, or the honeymoon period, was filled with many Barney moments. We love him, he loves us, it's all warm and fuzzy as the gray haired gets settled in. The next 90 days is not so warm and fuzzy, as we all realize that he was the wrong hire. Most first-time founders will go another 90 days trying to reform their rockstar hire, who has long forgotten how to get his hands dirty. After that fails, he's so close to his cliff, 90 days, that you let it go to the anniversary date of the hire, convincing yourself that the 3 months' salary is an acceptable proxy for the severance payment, especially since 12 months is a respectable tenure at a startup, enabling both the employee and the company to save face, avoiding a pretty big morale hit to the team about a critical hire not working out. But see, the thing is, you forgot to consider the opportunity cost of this mishire preventing you from hiring the right person sooner, and you just lost a year. And you see, the startup game is about executing like mad within a small window of time, and now you've missed this window. In this particular example, I fired this employee within months of hiring him, after the honeymoon period, and after another 90 days of clarifying expectations and giving him a fair shot to redirect. But before giving him the time to coast and hit his cliff. Even though I got slammed both internally and externally for the termination, can't you let him hang out for a year? We have so much money now. I never regretted it because I don't think the company would have survived without feeling the urgency to replace him quickly. Now, I'm not saying that firing an employee should ever be taken lightly. The first time the person you just fired tells you that is afraid of losing his house or that his daughter will now have to drop out of school, it will crush your soul. This is pretty much the worst part of being a CEO. You have to grow and prune your team continually and aggressively while trying to preserve a cohesive entrepreneurial culture, which is pretty hard. Which takes us to the next thing that changes when you stop bootstrapping. Slide 4, people, entrepreneurial culture, and battle rhythm. As hard as you try to prevent it, culture will change as you grow, and battle rhythm will become harder to maintain. Your company culture will evolve as the team transitions from being a family to being a village, and the amount of time you spend as CEO refereeing neighborhood disputes will start to grow, and what I call battle rhythm will get harder to maintain. I can best define battle rhythm by describing what it feels like when you don't have it. You end up revving in neutral, wasting a lot of gas because the cross-functional team is not speeding up or slowing down in sync. Software companies often submit to what I call the sine wave of death, where the company never definitively conquers the product debt that results from premature selling, which becomes a pretty vicious cycle. To placate customers, unrealistic promises are made by sales ahead of what product can produce, and before you know it, your software company is a custom dev shop worth maybe 2 times or 3 times revenue instead of 10 times revenue. This is the cost of sales and marketing not being in sync with product development, which is a pretty common problem. Slide 5, people, entrepreneurial culture, and bus drivers. Another factor that affects your ability to maintain battle rhythm is your ability to distinguish the bus builders from bus drivers. This skill is actually going to make or break your company. Initial teams are composed of builders, and it's easy to see that they're builders playing offense, pretty comfortable being judged and output every day. As you recruit a larger team to make success repeatable and actually need experienced talent that's seen the movie before, who have functional experience. As you recruit a larger team to make success repeatable and need experienced talent that's seen the movie before, actually have functional experience, it's not obvious which new hires will default to playing defense focused on inputs rather than outputs. Pretty soon the team is focused on efforts, which is really about how hard you try rather than results. Keep in mind that this phenomenon is a slow creep and the tipping point is invisible when the team expects to be judged on input rather than output. Measuring results is easy. Measuring how hard someone tried is hard. And then you have politics, which is the cancer of startups and the number one killer of entrepreneurial culture. Startups fail when bus drivers are well disguised as bus builders, just as hockey goalies playing the forward position aren't likely to win the game despite having watched forwards play the game over and over again. Oh, and the next one's a doozy. Slide 6. People, entrepreneurial culture, and you. The biggest risk to your company culture is actually you, because letting go is hard. Without conscious, deliberate change, you'll become a micromanager that destroys the company from within. Scaling your company means learning to appreciate what made you so good for the company up to this point, which is full stack agility, is precisely what makes you so bad with a larger team. Adaptability and agility are important at an early stage of growth, but now, repeatability is critical to nail and keeping humming along in a predictable way amidst the chaos. Your micromanaging is preventing this repeatability across the team. And now before Series A CEO probably spends half of his or her time consolidating input from external stakeholders, communicating the reconnaissance to the internal team that executes on the strategy and plan. But after the big round, your new VCs will want you to talk to everybody they've ever met to see how they can help. When the volume of external input increases, the amount of time you spend internally decreases. This pattern created over time is silent and devastating. When CEOs come back and react to what they perceive to be misexecution because it's not the way they would have done it, they demoralize the team. Hardworking lieutenants second-guess themselves, and you've set them up to fail. So the volume of external input increases, your time to think and process to make team decisions increases, and yet communication trust has been lost and you've become someone that is totally untrustworthy. This is a problem especially for those of us that are introverts. So what do? Slide 7, people, organizational hierarchy, and Goldilocks. As a reaction to your becoming an ineffective, untrustworthy micromanager, you'll be tempted to invite more hierarchy than necessary to control the chaos. As you grow the team, it becomes much harder to keep track of who is doing what and identifying where are the bottlenecks and issues. Some amount of organizational hierarchy is necessary so that the information sharing is predictable and not random. Now, keep in mind that premature or too much hierarchy introduces politics and rigidity that the company just can't absorb at this stage. And this is hard, especially because you're growing and hiring so quickly. You'll feel like Goldilocks, constantly calibrating what may be too much or too little organizational hierarchy. So far, you've hired outside of your circle. You have to stop micromanaging. You can't add too much hierarchy. So how do you get stuff done? Enter a process. Slide 8, process. Help the team see the same big picture. To scale the business, helping your people see the big picture must transition from a one-to-one experience to one of systematic scale and consistency. Moreover, if your team can't see the same big picture as it morphs continually, execution is pretty impossible. Most entrepreneurs fail at this stage because they underestimate how hard it is for the cross-functional team to read each other's minds. Before it was a family, people just like you, it was easier. But now you have sales and marketing speaking the why language, product speaking the what language, and engineering speaking the how language. You can say the exact same thing to everyone and they'll all hear something different based on their language filter. When you were solely a product organization, you existed in the black and white world of pure truth. Then you hire sales and marketing people who live in the world of aspirational truth, where they will invite gray where it doesn't exist, doused in pixie dust. If you don't prepare your engineers for this collision of worlds and explain that the salespeople are actually speaking the aspirational truth rather than lying, your engineers will blow the pixie dust off of your salespeople who will then fail, taking the company with them. Process helps remove this judgment that can derail cross-functional teams that speak a very different language and live in different worlds. Execution is just hard, period. Process is about making work repeatable and repeating. That is what will make a company scalable. The work is repeatable and repeating in a systematic way for the whole team, not just the founding team of geniuses who read each other's minds. I've learned that teams that scale beyond bootstrapping build and maintain together the institutional knowledge of processes that are shared and visible to the entire team. Keep in mind that the upkeep is the hard part rather than the initial building or creating. This is really, really hard. Slide 9, process. Trust the doer and enable systematic sharing to reach flexible empowerment. The tension between the need to empower the whole team and the chaos of everyone feeling empowered will completely consume you at this stage. Unless you empower everyone to create the institutional knowledge of processes and then refine them as a team, basically crowdsource it, you won't be able to scale fast enough with buy-in from the actual people doing the work. Specifically, you must trust that the people doing the work have the best idea of how it should be done. And remember that trust comes from the top. Then you must share by taking process out of everyone's fiefdom and making it a shared body of knowledge that morphs and grows continually along with your company. Finally, you can grow by sharing your processes among your team and creating opportunities to edit and improve. This is so important that I paused growing BackOps for the past 2 years to build Scalus, the software that BackOps desperately needed to scale beyond the bootstrapping stage, which is really about heroics from founders rather than repeatable success from the whole team. BackOps almost died. And what I wanted to do was share what we've learned to prevent other companies from feeling the same thing and failing. Slide 10, process, automate to make success inevitable. So scale is actually more about consistent product and service delivery rather than quality of product or service delivery, which is not an obvious realization when you transition from bootstrapping to building a real business. Consistency equals repeatability equals success. This means you have to become a metrics or data-driven organization that measures everything because you can't improve what you don't measure. This is when you bring the processizers into the organization, which is risky if too early. Processizers as people tend to be rearview-looking measurers that often see the glass half empty. Pretty much the opposite of founding builders that see the glass half full, or they couldn't do what they do. If the processizers are brought in too early in a startup, the creative energy and positive thinking tends to suffer, which can be fatal. In closing, keep in mind that timing and sequencing is everything. Focus first on product, then people, then process. This is what they mean when they say execution, execution, execution. Thanks for having me today.